what can ground us. And that's why I like Stay Spiritual, because I really believe that like the real truths and the real anchor that we have is our spirit, is the soul that we have, that can connect us to a higher objective reality that can tell us right and wrong and how we should live our lives in the way that we can be the most fulfilled, the most happy, the most at peace. It requires spirituality, because when you reduce everything to the material, that results in the dystopia in which we currently find ourselves.
Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin back again. And today we have another special guest with us. We have Daniel Haqiqatjou. He is the Muslim Skeptic from the Haqiqat Show. Now, he is a Muslim apologist who really enjoys talking about religion and politics. And I'm sure if you're looking for him, you could probably find him on the debate circuit somewhere out there.
I feel like Daniel is the type of guest that our Muslim audience would be like really hopeful that we would get. You know what I mean? Like, he seems very diligent and adamant about his belief. And so I'm kind of eager to get into this one.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for being on the show. It is great to have you here with us today. You're a well of insight. We've caught you on the debate circuit doing your thing, and we thought, man, this would be a great guest to have come sit down and tell us a little bit about Islam, some of the beliefs out there, what people may get wrong. But before we kind of get into that, we'd like to actually hear a little bit about your journey into Islam, how you kind of came into this, and how it led to the Muslim Skeptic YouTube channel and everything that you got going on.
Sure. Happy to be here discussing with you guys. So I was born in Houston, Texas, to Iranian parents who were immigrants from Iran. And I was raised, a typical American upbringing. I became more religious in high school and started practicing Islam around 10th or 11th grade. And then I went to college in Boston. I went to Harvard University, and at Harvard, I studied religion more. I studied Islam more, with different teachers, imams, and so forth, outside of campus, for example. And then I was studying physics and philosophy, and I had this goal or plan to go into academia in philosophy. So I went and pursued a master's degree in philosophy. But, my plan didn't turn out exactly as I had hoped. There was a huge financial disaster or crisis circa 2008, 2009. And I ended up going into tech, worked in tech for many years with Silicon Valley. And while I was in tech, I realized that there were still a lot of things I wanted to do in terms of dawah, or what we can say is apologetics, or proselytization, maybe, calling people to Islam. And I decided to do that outside of work hours, obviously writing online, writing on my own blog. And that kind of grew over time. This was over 10 years ago. Eventually, I have my own site, muslimskeptic.com, where myself and others write around this topic of Islam and dawah, apologetics. And then I started a YouTube channel as well and started making videos, etc. So that's where things started. But yeah, that's my background.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. We're honored to have you. Before we started recording, we were getting into, it seemed like we were getting into sort of the sovereign nature of Islam, and the idea of it as being sovereign truth that ought to be taken seriously, and that people ought not to mince their words about it. Get real honest and clear about the intent. And I was just curious about that, in terms of like, how does that work with like a democratic society? How does that work in a society of people that are seeking to be diverse, and all kinds of people have sort of conflicting beliefs? In a nutshell, I suppose what I'm asking is, like, I'm a little ignorant in this area, and I'm curious if it's common for a Muslim person to believe that the goal is like a Muslim world one day. Is that like, I know that's a little heavy right off the bat, but this is our second take. You know what I mean? We've already been into it. Sorry, folks. And going off what we were talking about before, is the goal to have everybody converted, or, and I shouldn't say our goal. Me and James aren't Muslim. We're here just to hear your insights on it.
Yeah, so Islam is a universalist religion in the sense that Islam claims that uh, this is the truth. This is the objective truth. This is objective right and wrong because God, the creator, defines what is right and wrong. And so God has sent messengers with books, which are divine revelation, in order to teach humanity what is truth, what is the meaning of life, what are we supposed to be doing on this earth in the limited life that we have, what comes after life, what was before our lives. And so these books brought from the prophets, the messengers, starting from the prophet Adam all the way to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, Jesus, and then final prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. They are coming with a system of law that not only dictates morality for us as individuals, but what about morality in context of marriage? What about morality in the context of your family? What about your community? What about society? What about a nation or international relations? What is the right divine guidance? What is right and wrong? What is just and unjust? And it's not a matter of opinion. Like, yeah, there are certain things that are opinion based. You might like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla ice cream, whatever. But when it comes to what is right and wrong, then there is an objective truth to that. And that's the kind of universalism that Islam preaches. And it's found in other religions as well. It's not found in other religions. But like, for example, Judaism. In Judaism, you have like a chosen people of God, and they're not actively looking for people to become Jews. So they don't have the same kind of proselytization like Christians do, for example, or Muslims do. But I think the most proselytizing force in the world today is this kind of secular liberalism, because secular liberalism says that, you know, there is right and wrong, there is truth and justice. Truth is defined by science and material empiricist investigation. That's what truth is. And then morality is based off of you know, a utilitarian kind of ideal of maximizing people's happiness, maximizing people's pleasure. How do you do that? This is what is going to determine what's right and wrong. So people come into a democratic assembly and vote on what they want based on their preferences and their desires. And that's what, you know, that's the best system. And everyone has to have this kind of system. In fact, we make it into kind of international law, and you have the United Nations that will sanction countries that don't abide by universal human rights, you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, put sanctions or even invade, you know, just like there's been so many invasions from the United States against Muslim countries and others on the basis, on the presumption that they're violating human rights, universal human rights. So the most proselytizing force in the world is liberal secularism, and millions have literally died at the hands of that particular ideology. But that's not to say that the idea of universalism is wrong. Obviously, Islam is universalist, but who decides what is true? Who decides what is objective and what is right and wrong? And that's something that people should be able to discuss and debate.
Well, one question that I don't want to miss out, I do want our audience to hear it, because I know that there's people from all different types of walks of life that watch our content. So I do want to answer. I'm curious about what people get wrong about Islam. What people, you know, because there's a lot of stereotypes out there. People might think they know what Islam's about already. What do you think that they get wrong, and what could you maybe correct or guide in that direction?
Yeah, so the kind of reason, one of the main reasons I got into apologetics or dawah is because I was dissatisfied with the answers that some Muslims were giving regarding these hot button or controversial issues. And I felt that there was too much of an effort to kind of liberalize Islam or sugarcoat Islam to make it palatable or appease certain Western sensibilities. modern Western sensibilities. And I was deeply dissatisfied with that, because it's not authentic. It's really not doing Islam any service. It's not doing non-Muslims any service, because it amounts to deception. And the thing about Islam is that Islam claims to be the final religion of God. And the reason that it has to be the final religion and it has to be preserved is because the whole purpose of God sending different prophets over time, over the human history, with different books, is that the message of God, revelation, gets distorted, because people will add things or subtract things from what God has said, how God wants us to live our lives. And that ends up distorting the religion of God, such that it's no longer the religion of God. It's something man-made. And it's something that is corrupted because people, based on their desires or based on politics or whatever it may be, they play and they change the religion of God. So then God sends a new revelation, a renewed revelation, a new prophet. And so the message of Abraham was corrupted. Then you had Moses come. The message of Moses was corrupted. Then you have Jesus come. The message of Jesus was corrupted. Then you have Muhammad come. Peace be upon them all. So it's very important that when the religion comes, the believers have to preserve that over time. And the thing about Islam is that Islam was revealed 1400 years ago with the final messenger bringing the final message. And that can be corrupted as well. So we have to work to preserve it. Now, if someone says that, well, this 1400-year-old religion conflicts with my sensibilities of what is right and wrong in the 21st century, in the West, in America, or in China, or wherever, well, no, duh. Of course, that's very plausible or likely to happen, just because things have changed so drastically in 1400 years because of technology, because of the economy, because of society, and on and on. So, but Muslims have a duty to preserve the teachings and preserve the purpose of Islam and the practice of Islam, the belief and theology of Islam, even if it's unpopular, even if it seems strange, even if it seems like we just don't get it. Like, we don't get, why is this religion saying X, Y, and Z? And a lot of the apologetics that I criticize and I don't really like from some Muslims is that they try to make Islam sound like, oh, it's exactly what you expect. It appeases all of your 21st century sensibilities, and there's nothing in Islam that could make you raise an eyebrow or feel maybe even disturbed. So that's not honest, and it's not doing Islam a service, in the sense that you're not being authentic to Islamic teachings. And an example of that is the teachings on violence, or the teachings on war, for example. And this is a very common critique about Islam. And you have two sides. You have one side that distorts Islam by saying that Islam is just terrorism, or Islam is okay with terrorism, and then ISIS has the authentic orthodox interpretation of Islam, like these terrorist groups. That's wrong. And on the other hand, you have people who go the other extreme and say, oh, Islam is just pacifism. Islam means peace. Islam doesn't sanction any type of violence at all. And that's also wrong. That's also appeasing to a kind of secular understanding of religion, that religion is just something that's private, in the private sphere. Your relationship with God is between you and God in your home or in the church, and it doesn't go beyond that. And a lot of religions, if not all religions, have kind of conceded that point to secularism, that, yeah, we're just in the private sphere telling you how to pray. But anything beyond that, we leave that to the secular state to take care of, and we keep a strict separation between the state and religion. But Islam says no. Islam says that the state, as I mentioned in the previous answer, the state also is supposed to abide by truth and justice, what's right and wrong. And who decides what is true and what is just? God ultimately is the one who decides. Therefore, God has the prerogative to tell us, what is right and wrong. So any type of, if you look at the UN, as I mentioned, you look at any state, you have a police force, you have a judiciary branch, you have this kind of enforcement of the right of morality, you have enforcement of right and wrong, of justice. And we accept that, like people generally accept, no, of course, you have to have law and order, otherwise you'll have a complete chaos. But Islam says that, yeah, we accept that model, but God is the one who decides what is just and what should be enforced. So, of course, Islam has violence. Islam has a theory of war. What is just war? What is, in terms of criminal punishments, what is the correct punishment for certain crimes? All of that is included within Islam. We don't outsource violence to the secular state. But we get criticized for that. We get criticized because other religions have done that kind of outsourcing, but Islam hasn't. Therefore, Islam gets branded as being violent. Islam has war. Islam has these kinds of things that are so offensive. But you have people who are perfectly fine with saying, "Oh, we support our troops and die for your country," and they don't even bat an eyelash at those kinds of violent sentiments because you're supporting war. But only if the secular state does it. But if a Muslim says, "I want to die for God," or "I want to, die for my God and for my people," then, that's terrorism. This is a double standard.
The religious side of things is like becoming corporatized in the world. It's like,
well, we've talked about it before. I said it's very hard to separate church and state because what someone believes is going to seep through regardless.
Exactly.
Well, what I was going to say is that like it seems like I see what you're saying in terms of that. The way I would put it is it seems like the corporatization of religion, which I think happens, it's like there's tax deductives and stuff like that if you're with the Christian religion. And one of the peculiar things is that like some religions where like, if you look at the New Testament of the Bible, which is like the closing statements of the entire religion, it seems to be pretty peace oriented, but historically there's been like crusades. There's been the opposite done in the name of that. People do all kinds of interesting things with religion, but I'll say this, like I knew a Christian one time that I was constantly trying to like debate with them about their religion. And they actually did me a huge favor by saying, look, I wouldn't care if you came with solid proof that didn't exist, Jesus wasn't real, whatever. I'm not giving up my religion. They were like, let's just draw a line in the sand here. And I appreciated that. And the conversation's been like far more pleasant ever since then. It's like, okay, I know where you stand. You know where I stand. We don't need to go in this like, and before we started filming this, I even mentioned that one of the things you said kind of spurned me on one of our videos to make a statement regarding all the reaction videos we do on Islam, is to say like, look, I don't want anyone to think that I'm considering becoming Islamic or that I probably won't, and I think it's fair to be clear about things. You mentioned earlier, somebody might get the false impression of Islam, join up, and then they read something in the scripture where they're like, well, I didn't know this was in there. There's all kinds of things even in the Bible that like didn't get mentioned when we were growing up in the church, and then you're like, what the heck? What's with this? I think it's good to be
informed,
concise and clear and diligent about disseminating the reality of the subject.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about kind of like the geopolitics and how it all plays a role. I'm curious about what you think would be like a utopian Islamic society. Is that possible in our world? And what would it look like?
Well, it's a utopian world is where people are living according to their purpose, living according to what God has created them to do. So God has created humanity to worship him. This is the power of God to create the entire universe, all of creation, what we know of it and what we don't know of it. And the relationship between the creator and the created is that the created submits to God and is subservient to God. And that's just natural given the position of God compared to us. God is all powerful, all knowing, all merciful, all wise, and he has this kind of highness above his creation. And just like a meek person will bow to a king, someone who is so much greater than he is, then in the same way, all of creation submits to God. And this is the case with the everything around us that is created, from the clouds to the mountains to the trees to the animals. Everything is submitting to the all high creator. And our purpose as human beings is likewise. That's when we are at most at peace and most in tranquility, is when our actions externally align with our inner purpose or our inner nature. In Arabic, it's called fitra, the fitra. And when that fitra that we have been created upon is pushing us or drawing us to want to know our creator, who is he? What is our purpose? Like, why are we here? Like, what is right and wrong? Like, that's the nature that we have that drives us to seek God and to seek our purpose. And then when we find that purpose and we realize that, okay, our purpose is to worship God and to be subservient to him, submit to him, then now now everything is aligned. And that's what Islam means. Islam means submission to God, and Muslim is one who submits to God. So that's the kind of utopic vision that Islam has. Now, does that actually play out? No, because God has created people with a will, and they have a choice. They can choose to submit to him and to love him and to obey him, or they can choose to hate him, to turn their backs on him and to disobey him. That's a choice that everyone has been given the right to make, but then God will ultimately judge, and God will punish those who turned their back on their fitra, on their nature, who rejected all the signs that God sent them, and decided that, no, the most important thing in life is me, serving myself, my in Arabic, nafs, what I want, my selfish desire. That's the most important thing. Or serving what I think is right. So I think what's right is, 21st century, just be a good person, like a vaguely good person. That's what it means to be good in the world.
Personal development. Okay. I'm developing like crazy.
Yeah, personal development. Exactly.
Yeah, it's very true. So that being said, from your perspective, what would a dystopian future be then? What would be the absolute worst case scenario? Or is it that even possible? Is it like, that's not going to happen because it's not in the book, or is it? I don't know.
We kind of are living in a dystopian world right now in many ways, because you have these systems that really are driving people to the brink of insanity. You have these kinds of systems that constantly are telling people that, the most important person to look out for is yourself. Just fulfill your desires. And you can call them lusts. You can call it greed or avarice. You can call it any of these vices, these mortal sins. And it's being promulgated through the most sophisticated technologies, through your smartphones and all of these apps. Now you have virtual reality, you have AI, you have all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs that make people numb to the kind of horrors that we're experiencing all around us. You have just constant distracting people to death. And when
the law of attraction,
you have like
the law of attraction.
So any kind of because people are just so conditioned to gratify themselves, like their bodily, at the bodily level. And that's really the lowest level of existence, like that a human being can have, because we're not like animals. We're not, in a certain sense, we are like animals in one sense, but we're not like animals in another sense, because we have a mind, we have a consciousness, we have a sense of right and wrong. And we can't just be living on the subsistence level of gratifying our desires, but the entire world has been set up, not only technologically, but also ideologically, because that's what liberalism teaches. That's what liberal secularism teaches, that we're going to just satisfy your desires through consumerism, right? We're going to capitalist consumerism.
It's not satisfying. It's not, consumerism is markedly, I think, not satisfying, right?
Yeah, because you do have this need, like there's some spirit there that wants more, that's calling you to more, but it's becoming easier to snuff that out and to just distract yourself. Like if you're just scrolling, like you're doom scrolling on your phone for hours at a time, like just constant, becoming numb through pornography, becoming numb through antidepressants, becoming numb because even like basic connections that people used to have, even like in the secular world, even those are being displaced with technology. So people used to have a lot more friendly interaction with your neighbors. Kids used to go outside and play, and wouldn't come back until dusk at night. And you would have a community. You would have like marriage. Like marriages were much more long lasting. They were more fulfilling. You had fewer divorces. And what the liberal narrative says is that, oh, but actually it was a hell, you know, in the past. People were secretly suffering. And actually we're in the best of times right now in 2025. But that's not true. Like we're old enough to know what it was like growing up. And things were a lot better in so many ways. Like I'm sure you guys might, or maybe you don't agree, but I think that when I was growing up, even like on a purely secular level, life was so much better and more fulfilling in terms of interactions with other people. Now everyone's on their phone. Now everyone doesn't have the time to meet up. People, marriages are, I hear horror, I don't know about you guys, but I hear horror stories all the time of divorces. Like people are just not satisfied in their marriages anymore. People are very selfish. Like you're trained to become a very selfish person, but the whole idea of marriage is that you give and take. You have to sacrifice for your spouse for a marriage to work, but that becomes a proposition that no one wants to take up. And that's why we have divorce rates increasing. If people even get divorced, the statistics are so dire, like 50% of 20-year-olds now will never get married. So this is, and then not to mention like having children and family life, all of that has been sidelined in a very short amount of time. Like things are accelerating at this rapid pace. And I don't know if the people who are in charge when it comes to politicians, governments, they even know what they're doing. I don't think that they know what they're doing. It's just a massive experiment. Like we're all guinea pigs. The whole human race is a bunch of guinea pigs. So this is just confusion. It's chaos. It's not really knowing like what lies in the next year, let alone 5 years, let alone 10 years. And it's horrifying. Like, what is the solution to this? Like, what can ground us? And that's why I like stay spiritual, because I really believe that like the real truths and the real anchor that we have is our spirit, is the soul that we have that can connect us to a higher objective reality that can tell us right and wrong and how we should live our lives in the way that we can be the most fulfilled, the most happy, the most at peace. It requires spirituality, because when you reduce everything to the material, that results in the dystopia in which we currently find ourselves.
Well, this is a good lead-in question to, because we've been talking a little bit about the dystopia there. How, I'm always fascinated with this. How is eschatology from the Islamic perspective? Because I know it seems like most religions have an idea how this thing's all going to wrap up, how this thing's coming together. From what you've learned and what you've studied, are we in that time period? Where are we headed? What are the signs that this is coming to fruition?
So there are signs that Islam gives, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave for the end of times. Like when is the last day? Because that's a critical belief in Islam. Islam has 6 pillars. You might have heard the 5 pillars of Islam. There's also, arguably more important, are the 6 pillars of Iman, or the 6 pillars of faith. And maybe it's good for me to just run down those. Sure, like yeah. The first is belief in God, Allah, as the creator who has no partner. He has no associates. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the angels, believing in the angels, like the archangel Gabriel, who brings revelation, for example, or Mikael or Michael, another angel. Then believe in the books that have been revealed, that God has sent revelation. So that includes the Torah that was revealed to Moses. That includes the Injil, the gospel that was revealed to Jesus Christ, and then the Quran that was revealed to Muhammad. Obviously, Islam claims that and holds that the previous scriptures have been corrupted. So like you can't say that I'm opening up the Hebrew Bible and that's what was revealed to Moses, or the Gospels like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's what was revealed to Jesus. because actually when you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's more of a biography of Jesus's life as opposed to Jesus himself giving revelation. Anyway, but that's belief in the books. And then you have to have belief in the messengers, the prophets that were sent. And we already talked about that, from Adam to Moses to Abraham to Jesus and Muhammad. 25 prophets are mentioned in the Quran, but Islamic belief is that there are even more. There are even more. Some narrations of the Prophet, peace be upon him, estimate that it's over 100,000, 124,000 prophets sent to humanity over the course of human history. Most of them are unknown. Most of them we don't know about. And then there's belief in the divine ordainment or preordainment, that God is in control. God has power over all things. According to his knowledge, God ordains what happens in the universe. That's the fifth pillar of belief. And then the sixth is the last day, the day of judgment, that there's going to be, everyone dies. And then on a specific day, the entire universe will end. God will end the entire universe, including all of creation. And then people will be resurrected, and body will be combined with soul. And then there's a day of judgment where God will hold judgment over people. And then that's the decision on, according to God, who goes to heaven, eternal paradise, and who is punished eternally in hell. So that's just a rundown of belief. But the signs of when this final day is coming, there are different signs that the Prophet, peace be upon him, has given us. So one of, like, for example, the biggest sign is the Antichrist. You know, there's going to be an Antichrist who will come. And why is he the Antichrist? And the Arabic is Masih Dajjal. Dajjal. What makes him an Antichrist is he claims to be the Messiah. He claims to be a Messiah, and he will have all kinds of powers. Like, he will be a very powerful figure, and people will love him. There's
some dudes like that right now. There's some guys out there like that.
There are people like that. Yeah. And these are precursors to the final Antichrist. And he has certain description that we can identify him by. Like, one of the descriptions, he has one eye, like one of his eyes is defective and he can only see through one eye, for example. Whoa. But he will claim to be the Messiah. Then he'll claim to be God himself. And many people will follow him. And this is like a huge test, you know, for the true believers. Like, are you going to fall for this deceiver? And then eventually another big sign of the day of judgment is Jesus Christ will return. Jesus Christ, the true Messiah, because that's Islamic belief. The Islamic belief is that Jesus Christ was not crucified. They tried to crucify him, but God saved him at the last moment and raised Jesus Christ to heaven. And Jesus Christ is still alive. And then he will come back to earth, will slay the Antichrist, and then he'll live a normal, like a human life, and then he'll pass away. So that's another major sign. These are the major signs. There are also smaller signs. So one of the smaller signs that you may have heard of, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that one of the signs of the day of judgment approaching is that the Bedouins of the desert will compete with each other to build tall buildings. This seems like a strange claim to make, because Bedouins in the desert at that time in 7th century Arabia, they had certain characteristics. Number one, they're uneducated. Number two, they're nomadic. They didn't have cities. They were traveling in tents. And they were just generally kind of brutish people. Like, they weren't very cultured. Whereas tall buildings are the mark of civilization, like very high civilization. It's after reaching a certain level of surplus, agricultural economies reach a level of surplus where they can now spend time on the arts, on literature, on architecture, and then they build like bigger and more magnificent structures. So it's very strange to claim that Bedouins would be building taller and taller buildings. Yet now we see that exactly this. Yeah. We see the descendants of people who just literally 2 generations ago were living in tents and are from that kind of culture in the Arabian Peninsula. They acquired a massive amount of wealth because of oil, petroleum, and that now they're literally competing to build taller and taller buildings. And it's very bizarre for Muslims to see this, because these people claim to be Muslim. Are they not aware of this statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him? Because it wasn't a good thing. The Prophet peace be upon him, was insulting them, basically. Like, they're barefooted and they're kind of ignorant, and they're competing to build tall buildings because they're just deluded by life. But you have these individuals who are doing exactly this in some of these Gulf countries. And I think the tallest building now is Burj Khalifa in Dubai, but there's like another big project coming in Saudi, which is going to beat it. And then Egypt also is trying to, so it's a mess. But this is one of the signs, like this is one of the true prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And there's other things too, like increasingly men will act like women. They'll be feminized. Women will increasingly be masculinized, like they'll be more masculine. Things like this we also find in the prophetic narrations.
If I was the Antichrist, I would get like a glass eye or shades or something. You know what I mean? I'd be like on top of that eye thing. I'd be like, they can't know I got one eye. So maybe we won't.
But if you notice the one eye symbolism for the conspiracy theorists out there, one eye symbolism is everywhere. If you look at popular culture and popular media, if you look at the dollar bill, what do you see on the dollar bill? You see a pyramid symbol, like an Egyptian pyramid. And then you see what's on top of the pyramid. It's a single eye. If you start looking for it, you'll see this single eye everywhere as a very, and you'll, like, there are people who are really into this kind of conspiracy theory, and they compile it. Non-Muslims, because they say that this is a symbol of like Freemasonry. And like, you'll have all these celebrities on cover magazines, like covering one eye and like smiling. And so
crazier than that, wearing devil horns and putting everything upside down. And
exactly.
I think a lot of it's like for salacious purposes. I wanted to sort of backtrack a little bit to when you were describing the dystopian nature of our current modern day. And I think you're right in a lot of ways. I think that we're like a dissatisfied people. And it's the thing that came to mind was it's almost like a bunch of traumatized people that have become like hyper greedy have like led the charge of culture. And now we're all like trailing behind, super vain, super narcissistic, super self-centered. And I weighed against things like my partners getting their PhD, and they were noting this odd study that people after like a catastrophe where they've all had to temporarily come together and put their differences aside, when it's done and the dust settles, they remark at like they miss the camaraderie that happened with that. We are isolated a lot in this modern culture, and I wonder if some people with some bad notions have become power and money hungry. We've lost, by and large, the average consumer citizen in the West probably doesn't think on a daily basis too much about starving people or people that they're not even in the realm of like worrying about morality yet. They literally are driven by need. And then us as affluent people are driven by capitalism. But I get the sense that we're kind of burning that out, just like we sort of burnt some things out during the Dark Ages, like people burned out this notion that you could take a religion that's supposed to be based on peace and turn it into a crusade, and we'll make people believe this. And people burned out all kinds of manner of barbarism during the Dark Ages. And we're in this age of like hyper consumerism, hyper vanity. And I wonder sometimes if this is like a step to get to the point where we realize it didn't do it, and maybe we ought to turn inward or have some more, return to a reverence of God or something like that. I'm thinking out loud, and I was wondering what you think of that.
I think that we're reaching a crisis point. A lot of people have realized that the kind of consumerist, capitalist, liberal secular model isn't really paying the dividends. It's not really meeting the promises that it's made for human life. I think people are really going through existential angst by what they see around them. And the claim has always been that, beginning from the Enlightenment, that, look, once we discover science and we base all our decisions on reason, then we're going to reach utopia. Like, we just have to be willing to change. Like, that's the most important thing. We have to be willing to put aside our previous dogmas and stop being dogmatic and be willing to change and update. And nothing is sacred. Everything should be questioned because there's got to be a better way. And science is going to reveal that. And it might take a generation, 2 generations. It may take 100 years. It may take 200 years. But eventually we're going to get there. And this is what has been assumed by Western thinkers, philosophers for the past 250 years. And it ends with, you know, someone like Francis Fukuyama coming out along and saying, oh, this is the end of history. Like, we have reached the end of history because, you know, we've discovered all that there is to life. It's just basically utilitarian consumer capitalism.
We got Planet Starbucks, Planet Walmart.
Yeah, everything we need, we've got it. So this is the end of history. And that was like in the 90s, and everything that's happened since then has been such a rude awakening for people with that mindset that, no, actually, it seems like we're worse, like things are worse. People are more confused. We have fewer answers than we did in the past. And then people realize that, well, it seems like these traditions that we kind of destroyed and that we kind of like these things that we said were taboo, so we broke all the taboos. It looks like they were taboo for a reason. It looks like we had these traditions for a reason. We just forgot what the reason was. But people weren't doing these things because they were just irrational, blindly following. Like, some of these things had a real utility and purpose, and we forgot that, so we got rid of it. And now things have devolved into such a sorry state. We need to return back to tradition. So some of this, like the Me Too movement, I think is a good example, because the Me Too movement, what was that about? It was about sexual harassment. It was about men who, and sometimes women, who they were acting very inappropriately at work or in the university. And it was leading to rape. It was leading to all kinds of assault and harassment. And that blew up. Like, that was happening, and it kind of became public. And then what was interesting is that people started saying things like, okay, at my job, I'm a man, and I don't think it's right for me to be in private with a coworker of the opposite sex. I don't think that's appropriate because I have to protect myself. What if she accuses me of something? Like, maybe I don't intend to do anything wrong or harass anyone, but I just say something by mistake, and then that gets escalated to HR, and then my whole life is destroyed. So as a precaution, I'm going to kind of segregate myself. I'm going to kind of exercise this kind of modesty to prevent this kind of explosive situation that can literally ruin lives. Oh, I wonder, did religion say anything about gender relations? Did religion have anything to say about men and women should abide by certain modest practices and maybe not engage in this kind of overly friendly, casual type of relationship, because that leads to problems? And this is what we see like in Islam. Like, Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that a man and a woman are not alone together without the Satan being the third party with them, right? Because there's temptation, because there's always that possibility when you're alone with someone that you know, non-family member, obviously. So this is something that's not just in Islam. We find it in other religions as well. Modesty, gender separation, and maintaining bounds of decency and propriety. That's something that's been discovered now, rediscovered in the Me Too, post-Me Too world, because destroying that tradition, destroying that kind of normative practice resulted in what many were horrified by, a complete disaster, a destruction of so many lives. That's just one example, but we have to return to tradition. I think that's my message.
But it's interesting. There's a couple of interesting things. One, that they return to it at all, that people would go and do that and return to it. It seems to me that part of the problem could be somebody's tendency to identify with certain things during the progression of things. Like, somebody might, let's take like a hypothetical progression of somebody. They're like the prototypical prodigal son. They start off and they're religious, and then they're like, you know, I'm going to go live wild and free. And they go out into the world and they see the emptiness they're in. And then they return home and they're like, what have I done? You know what I mean? Some people, I think, get caught in that world. They get a little stubborn about it, and they believe because they evolved out of religion to begin with that they're superior, and then they, out of stubbornness, maybe don't return. But then there could be somebody that for lack of like being able to acknowledge the reality of the emptiness of it, chooses, you know, well, I guess I'll identify with this because this lines with my newfound reform. I wonder about that. I wonder what role identity or the tendency for people to strongly identify with things rather than seeing their life as kind of a progression. I wonder if that plays a role at all, you know? Anybody? James or Daniel?
I had on my mind, I was thinking kind of like a hierarchy of values, like what people value. And I know it's kind of a little off of what you said. I think actually you made a good point there. Like you can get so trapped maybe in an identity that you get stuck there. It stops maybe some of your progression. And I think that was kind of what you're pointing at.
I think we have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at anyone who looks back at their life, they'll probably be able to see the phases of their life as they've, gone. Like I was kind of this way in my 20s, this way in my 30s. And then I think if you looked at studies, you probably might find that people who kind of like stop someplace, there's usually a slowdown. Usually within, I think by 30, people typically tend to stick with what they got going on and they carry that to the end. Not always, but I think that's a common feature. But maybe to springboard off of what you're talking about, I wanted to ask you about kind of hierarchy of values within Islam, and maybe pointing out, maybe taking truth and love, where do they fall on that hierarchy? Is truth above love? Where does love fall in there? And the reason I ask is just because we had kind of jokingly talked a little bit before we started recording about the serious nature sometimes of Islam, how there's a very firm stance on things. And I'm curious about where love fits into that.
Yeah, so the love is so when you look at, have you heard of the 99 names of God?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
I think we reacted to that something with it. Maybe.
Yeah, so one of the names of God, so you have Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, so like the merciful, the beneficent, beneficent, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but like the mercy and forgiveness of God, the loving nature. There's Al-Wadud. Al-Wadud is one of the names of God, meaning the loving. You also have Al-Haq. Al-Haq means the truth. That's another name of God in the Quran, the truth. So these are names of God, attributes that God has in the most perfect and sublime form. And then those kinds of qualities, we also find them in Islam. We find them in the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his practice and the way that he lived. The way that he treated others is with mercy and with love. And these are beautiful things that we can all appreciate. There are examples of how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would just care about everyone around him. Like he would care about the small, the children. He would play with children, like for example, his grandsons. He would be praying, and praying involves bowing and prostrating in Islam. And then his grandsons, Hassan and Hussein, would get on his back and they would kind of like, because they were toddlers basically, really young, and they would just like want to like grab onto him and get on top of him. And so that kind of playful nature, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was extremely loving and kind with his wives, taking care of them, being very concerned about what they wanted or how they felt, being very concerned about his companions and his community, and just so many examples of his loving nature. And Muslims are supposed to also exemplify all of those characteristics with our children, with our spouses, with our parents, with our communities, even with our neighbors. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that if one of your neighbors is hungry, like none of you truly believes, if your neighbor is going hungry, you have food, your stomach is filled, but your neighbor is starving and you don't even have the concern to offer him anything or her anything. So those are the kind of values that Islam teaches. But you're saying that you also notice that in Islam, there's also a stern aspect to it. And there's a kind of cut and dry aspect, maybe you could say. And that is also a part of Islam. That's part of the beauty of the balance of Islam, because on certain things, you do need to be strict. You do need to be clear cut, because that is part of God's mercy. In the same way that, like, I have 5 boys, and my 5 boys, there is a time for play, there's a time for having fun, there's a time for joking, there's a time for loving them to death. But part of loving them to death is also giving them a hard and fast rule, like, this like kitchen knife. You're not, you can sword fight with a stick, in the backyard, but don't pick up a kitchen knife. Like, I wish this was a theoretical example, but it's not. Like, don't use the kitchen. Like, you have to have a hard and fast rule, and it's out of love. It's out of my love for my sons, that I don't want them to hurt themselves. And God also has certain hard and fast rules. And when it comes to living your life and enjoying, like, the fruits of life, because there's so many fruits and pleasures that God has allowed us to experience, no problem. But there's also hard and fast lines, and in Arabic it's called hudud, like the limit. What are the limits? Just don't go beyond this limit. You can do anything that you want, just don't cross this line. And we need that. Human beings need that. And I think it's a kind of a sickness, like a spiritual sickness. For some people, when you tell them don't cross this line, they want to cross it even more. Like, they want to cross that line, and they want to violate that taboo even more. And that's like a satanic kind of tendency, because that's basically the fall of Satan. And in Islam, we have the same concept of the fall, except that Satan is not an angel. Satan was what's called a jinn. I don't know if you've talked to any Muslims about the concept of jinn, or watched it. Yeah, so a jinn is a different type of creation, but Satan or Lucifer or Iblis in Arabic is a jinn, and he was given just a very simple direction, like, show respect to Adam, the first human being. God has created him. Show respect to Adam. And Satan said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm superior to Adam. He's made out of clay. I'm made out of fire. I'm better than him. I'm not going to do that. So for that kind of disobedience, like that kind of effrontery, that kind of, turning his back to something that God, because Satan believes in God. Satan believes in God and was a worshiper of God. But then God had one simple thing commanding him, and then he refused. He said he's better. He knows better than God. That's his fall. And human beings, we have that same test. We have that same line, that had those hudud that God has drawn for us, and they're hard and fast, and they're stern, but it's for our own good. It's for our own good. But outside of that, it's all out of love. It's all out of mercy and care for each other, and ultimately our love for God.
A few things sprung to mind as you were speaking there. And it was one, like, love is a powerful force. And I happen to believe that that good things often are done in love, and sometimes extreme things there's potential for things to be extreme, because we vary as people. We're all different. But I understand, I see the relevance and the need for rules and all sorts of things. But a case study just came to mind in terms of, like, the idea of rule breaking. And famously, like, the people that first really put a lot of the groundwork down for like anatomy and surgery were people that were like grave robbers. Like, the early academics were, like, stealing cadaver bodies from graves, and it was, like, ghoulish. But this led to, like, modern science in some way. So to me, there's a weird ground for, like, okay, well, how weird are we going to get here? And I'm just opening up. I'm just trying to open up into the idea of, how do we justify where we do break rules? How do we justify where we don't? What do you happen to think about what I was just saying now?
So you're saying that there's a potential for breaking rules that can lead to a good result. And this goes,
Well, sorry, just to back it up, just to, like, put an end on it. I think about, like, Amish people. Is it Amish people? Who are the people that live like it's the 1800s or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't we why wouldn't there be a premium on more of that? Like, well, wait a sec. We're causing some, which all this social media and everything, we're becoming more efficient at sinning. We're becoming more and more technologically like gas powered at sinning. Why not put a cap on progression itself? I'm just curious about this.
That's a very deep question. I have a lot of sympathies for the Amish. I think that they have some good ideas. Like, I think that, do we really know the cost of constant technological progress? Where is this all going to end up? And like I said earlier, like, this seems to be like a massive experiment on the human race, and no one really knows where the guardrails are and where the brakes are. There's no brake to pull. So when we get into a situation where now we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about a future where I don't think it's just in the realm of science fiction. I think this is increasingly becoming the reality, that human beings are just going to be isolated. All of our interactions are just going to be mediated through the cloud, maybe even with the Neuralink technology that Elon Musk is working on. We're going to be able to upload our consciousnesses into the cloud. I think that kind of Black Mirror type of reality is no longer so fictional. I think this is actually what's where things are leading. Like, there's a very clear progression, and where are the brakes on that? Is there even an option for people to say anymore, like, hey, I want off, like, I don't want this anymore, let's go back to pre-industrial life? Or actually, I just want like technology at the level of the 1990s. Can we just go back to the 1990s? That's no longer an option. Like, that's no longer on the table for us, and that's a big cost. Like, that's a big kind of deal with the devil to make, just because, wow, I can now order amazing tacos on my phone, and I can I can watch videos from around the world at the touch of a button and chat with people. Like, okay, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I enjoy those comforts as much as anyone else. But what am I paying for that? Like, what are my children going to pay for that?
For hedonism, it's like efficient, the most efficient version of hedonism. It's like,
yeah,
add 2 speakers on the side of my head, just pumping in, reaffirming that you are amazing. Just like utter isolation, no critical feedback, and it's empty somehow. How the hell do we get everything we want? And it's still somehow, we got to take a bunch of pills and be in hours and hours of therapy because we're also screwed up,
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not an accident. Like, these philosophies, this is why I studied in undergrad and graduate school and thereafter. It's like these philosophies coming out of the Enlightenment set us up for what we're experiencing now 250 years later, because you have this ideology of utilitarianism and liberalism. What liberalism says is that human beings are the most happy when you maximize their choice and when you maximize their freedom. Like, that's when human beings are the happiest. And then, well, how do we define happiness? That's where utilitarianism comes in, with philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, who say that, well, happiness, forget about this metaphysical mumbo jumbo. Happiness is just pleasure signals. Like, you get pleasure signals and you get pain signals, because we're ultimately animals. There is no God. There is no spirit or spirituality. All that really matters is you have to maximize the pleasure signals and minimize the pain signals. And that is what happiness is. And that's what the pursuit of happiness is. So that when you adopt that ideology, when you adopt that philosophy and make that your worldview, you're going to get the modern world. Why? Because technology, a kind of scientific materialism, is going to be marshaled towards the construction of these technologies to improve the amount of dopamine that you get, like the pleasure signals, and reduce the pain signals that come from like toil, from work, from having to struggle through a job, like struggle through okay, I don't have to worry about a horse and buggy anymore. Like those Amish, I have a car that I can get into and I can drive to wherever I want to go. So my pain is being decreased because I don't have to deal with a horse and buggy. So that modern world is a product of those ideologies.
I wasn't by the way, in case there was it wasn't clear, I wasn't trying to make fun of Amish people or something. I was just pointing it out.
They're not watching this. They're not watching this. Don't worry.
Yeah. I was just pointing it out because I thought it was such a good example, and I often wondered, are we going to see pockets of people one day springing up that are like the 1960s? Like, we're not going any further than we got Friday Night Football, the whole town shows up, and I wondered about that, like if you would see a similar thing, but with different decades. But you make such a good point there about pleasure seeking and this premium on happiness. It's like akin to the nature of a drug addict. You're seeking. The part of the problem is it's an endless seeking, and the stakes get higher and higher and higher. I think that we've often like wondered what even spirituality is at the end of the day, because we're not one affiliated religion. We try to hear everybody, but we're like, wait a sec, what the heck are we talking about with spirituality? And it seems like one aspect of it is, in lieu of this conversation, it seems to me that an aspect of it is getting the wrong way out, like starting to see the haram, I guess the word is,
Yeah.
for what it is. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful.
No, not at all.
But seeing it for what it is and the limits therein and all this stuff is, I think, causes like a natural return to seeking something greater than that. But we are very mired in this modern day in this like drug addict type behavior, whether it's stimulants of any kind. You know what I mean? It's an endless pursuit, greater and greater and greater. And I think even religion can fall into that category. And I think even spirituality can fall into that. You go to some retreat and you have an enlightenment experience or something like that, and then you're sort of chasing it forever, when really it's like you cleaned up your diet a little bit, you slowed your heart rate a little bit, and it was even a bit of a challenge maybe so you got some endorphins going. And I'm rambling now.
That's good. In the midst of the spirituality talk, I got to ask you, like, because one thing I hear a lot from when we do reactions and stuff is that like Islam is the most rational. It's there's even a channel out there called The Rational Believer. It's rational, but there is also a supernatural element here. We're talking about God. It's not like I think even the Quran mentions immaculate conceptions. There's a supernatural element here. And I'm always curious with all our guests that we have on the show, as someone who's been a part of the faith for so long, do you have an event in your life or anything that like supernatural that happened to you that really, I know it's personal. I know but like, did you ever have like a God encountering moment that you could share or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are personal things that happen. They didn't really lead me to be Muslim or confirm my faith in that way. That's not the type of relationship I have with Islam. I never doubted being a Muslim. So maybe some will say that that's an epistemic weakness that I have. I would counter that, of course, but without getting too far off your question, yeah, there's a lot of experiences that I've had over the years that are hard to explain, and I couldn't even explain them if I wanted to. And that's the nature of spirituality, and a lot of religious people have that, whether you're Muslim or not. But just having a sense of being small, having a sense of just, wow, like if I did not exist, like what would that be like? And there's clearly God and I'm nothing in comparison. Like that kind of, again, it's very hard to articulate. That's something that it's not only something that you experience in Islam, that's something that you should pursue, like that kind of sense of smallness. It's called khushu' in Arabic, having khushu', and it's something that you should strive in prayer. It's just this feeling of that I'm really nothing. Like it's an effacement of the ego, basically, like your sense of who you are, as opposed to like being a part of a creation and being subservient and submitting to God. Like, so it's not only like a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing, not only a mental thing, it's also a something in a different realm of who you are as a person. But in terms of like other things that might be more fun to talk about, like if you heard about jinn, right? So yeah. A lot of Muslims have jinn stories. So I have my own jinn stories. And my dad has the craziest the craziest jinn stories. And my dad is not like a hippie type person, or he's not, he's like an engineer. He's an engineer and a very like rational person, but he'll tell you the craziest things. But for me personally, like I've experienced it a couple of times as well. Like and the idea of haunted houses, like we have that in Islam. Like that's what jinn again, like they're not, you can't see them. Sometimes they might take a form of like a animal, for example, or a snake, but they're defined as being created from smokeless fire, but they're invisible. They're invisible, but they can have effect and impact on the world. So any kind of supernatural paranormal activity, Muslims will interpret, oh, that's just jinn. Oh, you thought you saw aliens? That's just jinn. That's just jinn.
Yeah.
You thought you saw a ghost? That's just jinn. So, but they dwell in abandoned places. That's the thing. They dwell in abandoned places, like houses like have been abandoned for a long time. So I just happened to be, this happened in the UK a couple of years ago, and I was visiting for about a couple of weeks, speaking at different places. And then a friend in the UK in London had a flat. They call it flats. Oh, in Canada they call it flats or apartments. US we call it apartments.
Flat. Some people call them a flat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we Americans, we call it an apartment, but he had a flat, and it was empty for a long time because he was trying to rent it out. He said, oh, you can just crash there, just crash there for a couple of nights. So I said, sure, no problem. I went, and so it's empty. The apartment is empty except like a mattress. It was a nice place. Don't want to insult my friend. It's a nice place, but in the middle of the night, around 4 a.m., I was start hearing some sounds, and it's like, okay, this was like 4 a.m. And then it was coming in the room, like sound in the room, and it was just a lot of rustling, like because I had my suitcase and some plastic bags that people were giving me like chocolates and stuff as a gift, for speaking at their mosque or whatever. So then there's like rustling in this bag. So I thought, my first thought was, oh, this is a jinn from the unseen. My first thought was like, there's some kind of like insect.
Yeah. There's a rat in the house.
There's a rat. There's a mouse. And I was convinced that that's the case. And I don't like, obviously, insects in where I'm sleeping. So then I like turn on the lights, and then like I try to find where's this insect to stop the rustling because I'm trying to sleep, and there's nothing. There's nothing anywhere. I go through every single bag, and it wasn't the kind of rustling that, oh, it's like a small little ant. Like it had to be like the size of a mouse. It had to be something substantial. And there's no insect. And it's not like the room is like, it has a lot of stuff where an insect could go hide. It's like a bare room and just a mattress and just those bags and my suitcase. So I go through everything because I want to get rid of this rodent or this insect. And there's nothing. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe it's a wind. Like maybe there's some breeze that's coming in and rustling, but all the windows are closed. All the windows are closed because it's cold. Like it's in October. In London, it was like too cold to keep your windows open, and there's no fan on. There's nothing that could cause that rustling. So I'm freaking out now. I'm like, okay, reciting Quran, like making, the kinds of prayers for protection against jinn and shayateen, like Satan's. So I'm doing those prayers. But then I thought, look, I got a busy schedule. I got to get some Z's. I got to get some sleep. Let me try sleeping. I turn off all the lights, put my head on the pillow. Within 5 minutes, again, with the rustling. I was like, okay, that's it. I leave, I leave the room. Get here. So yeah, that's my encounter.
Thank you, God, for not giving me scary. That would freak me right out. It's so funny, Old Faithful, like it must be the wind. Like it's amazing how people rationalize. I remember I played a trick on him when he was a teenager. I'm 5 years younger than him, and he was sitting in the living room with his girlfriend, and before she came over, I put like a string around a little like trinket in the room, and they're watching a movie together, and I like pulled the trinket off the shelf, and she's like, James, what the heck? And James is like, I don't know, sometimes things just fall off.
Poltergeist.
He was so dismissive of it. Like, she's like, things don't just fall off of stuff. But that's crazy. And I'm sure there's all kinds of stories. I'm astounded at some of this. I had a guy once tell me that he had like a demon or something in his house. And I'll just cut to the end of it. He had a religious practitioner come over and cast it out. I don't know if that's something you guys do, is cast out jinn or whatever. Maybe we can get into that. But he said he had like a pastor or something come over and cast it out. I suppose they probably did it in the name of Jesus. And he said the thing went right past him out the door. He was like, I came up the stairs and went past me at the door. And I was like, I would be possessed after that. I'd be like, I can't handle this. That's too freaky. But so is there like Islamic exorcists type stuff? Is that like a thing that happens? Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's called Raqi. Raqi. Yeah. Raqi is a person who does ruqya. Ruqya means the kind of, has different. Raqi has different functions, but one of them can be like when there's a possession, a jinn possession, to cast out the jinn, and they have it's basically involves reciting Quran. That's the primary way to do it. But yeah, it's a reality. Like, people get possessed, and this is not like a fictional thing. Obviously, if you're a more skeptical person, but you have psychologists. I don't know if you saw that famous piece in the Washington Post. I believe it was the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, where a professional psychologist wrote an entire article saying that this is something that cannot be explained scientifically. Yeah. Like, there are people that I have treated personally. This is the psychologist speaking, or psychiatrist. I've treated personally. It's just a girl like in rural Alabama. There's no way that she could have learned fluent Brazilian.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
There's no way. It's impossible in terms of what we know of the brain and what we know of language processing for this to happen. And the only explanation that we have that is demon possession, is actual possession. There is something unseen that our science has not accounted for, our MRIs cannot account for. So we definitely have that in Islam as well.
The language thing is bizarre. I had a friend whose father was like a pastor or something, and he had all kinds of stories of people that just had weird knowledge. They would know things they shouldn't know, and I've heard of the people being able to speak in languages. They're like, they've never been around this. How do they have this accent and everything?
Since we're in the strange realm, I'm always curious about like the outer universe and aliens. Would that affect anything in terms of your own personal beliefs? Like, if aliens showed up tomorrow, and parked on the White House front lawn, would anything like that, like a discovery, change the way you think about certain things, or would it mess with certain theologies? Or
it's actually an expected part of Islamic theology.
Okay.
And I'll explain what might sound strange, but this is something that has been speculated about, that in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions, basically. So you had some of his closest companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because some verses of the Quran, for example, will say like, okay, there's the East and the West. Like, there's the East, the lands to the East, and there's the lands of the West. And there are some verses that refer to the two Easts and the two Wests. And there are some verses that refer to the Wests, plural, and the Easts, plural. So what is that referring to? And then also terms like alameen. Alameen, which is in the first chapter of the Quran, Allah is described, Rabbul Alameen. Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of all of it's translated as worlds. Lord of all the worlds, but alameen can also refer to all the races, or all the peoples, all the sentient beings, in like a more abstract sense. So there has been speculation that, well, why should it only be human beings? Like, okay, we already know because of the Quran and Islamic theology that, well, there are different types of creation. There's the angels, and angels are created from light, and they have a certain way. God has given them a certain role, but they have sentience. Then you have the jinn, and this is another type of creation. They have their own world, and they have their own reality, and sometimes that intersects with our reality. And then we have human beings, ins, what are called ins or insan. But why couldn't there be other creations? God can create whatever he wills, right? And he's created certain animals. He's created, bacteria. There could be other types of sentient beings. And then there are also, we're talking about the end of times, there are other beings. And this is in Christianity or the Bible, even in Judaism, Gog and Magog.
Yeah.
If you've heard of them. So that's in Islamic theology as well. Ya'juj wa Ma'juj is the Arabic. Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. So Ya'juj wa Ma'juj are described as this very bizarre type of sentient being that is not exactly human. And there is a debate. Are they human? Are they some other kind of creation? And where are they living? Because we don't see them. But the Quran mentions that they have been trapped behind a wall. They've been trapped behind the wall, and they're trying to get out of that behind that wall, but they won't be able to do so until the end of times. And that's when they'll wreak havoc, when they will burst forth from behind this wall. Now, some Muslim theories are that, well, is this some kind of a hollow earth theory? Like maybe there are these massive regions underneath the earth's crust in these cave systems that are undiscovered or not, they're unknown to modern man. Maybe they're in the North Pole. Maybe they're in the South. The entrance is in the North Pole or the South Pole or somewhere else. And we are just not privy to this parallel world that's right beneath our feet. Could that be possible? And I think that it's important this is one of the epistemic virtues that Islam teaches, is to be humble, that human beings have been given very little knowledge of our reality, even the reality that is right in front of our face. We have been given we have very limited senses. We have 5 senses, but we know that even electromagnetic light, there's a whole spectrum that we have no clue about. Ultraviolet, infrared, gamma rays, these are part of light. But there's only a small part of the spectrum, the visible light, that we can actually sense. And that could be the case with any number of things. We don't know what we don't know. So we have to be humble. We have to have this kind of submissiveness to God, that God knows and we don't know. So I don't think that the discovery, like alien landing, would rock Islamic theology or make us really question. Obviously, it would be because you have the Pentagon in the US, like the government here, the consensus now seems to be that there are aliens. I don't know if you've been following this. There are aliens and they have technology and they're in Area 51. That I don't know how it happened, but suddenly that's like the consensus and it's being reported on CNN. But yeah, so that's the perspective of Islam on
I don't
aliens.
know if it would be a downer or funny or whatever if we've arrived at another planet and they didn't really look like us, but they had crucifixes and Buddhist statues that all they were the same as us. We'd be like, oh man, it's more the same.
Or they go straight to Mecca and they start circumambulating around the Kaaba.
Maybe, yeah, and I don't. That'd be so peculiar. Yeah.
No, that's it's interesting because when you look at kind of a more expansive reality, one thing something that we commonly hear from the people that watch our show is that life is a test from the Muslim audience. That there's a test here, and as not to throw a huge hard question out there, I'm sure you've probably heard it a million times, but the whole idea of reality being a test for kind of the afterlife and everything like that, with God and all his knowledge and everything that he has, why go with the test route that results in some going to infinite eternal damnation while some go to heaven? Why not another something that doesn't require so much horror? Why not maybe a life that okay, it's going to be hard, you'll have to pay for it, but eventually everyone will kind of figure it out in the end, and we'll go with that will be the end result. Why the test?
Well, I think it's a question about the stakes. Why are the stakes so high? And I think that is just the nature of the issue. This is something that it's to get our attention, that this is something that really is what life is about. So take it seriously. The consequences are so severe. Don't just put it off and, oh, okay. If the stakes weren't so high, okay, there's not going to be punishment. You're just going to like feel sad that you got the test question wrong. Okay, well, whatever then. Like, I'll just get it wrong. I don't care. Like, there's not really a lasting consequence there. But if the consequence is so lasting and the signs and the evidences are there, apparent for everyone to see, then that makes you pay attention. That makes you really take the question seriously, the test seriously, so you choose the right answer. And that's really that's a necessary part of finding God. Because if it were just something that was irrelevant or just low stakes, okay, well, you get it wrong or right, who cares? Like, it doesn't, let me just live my life however I want. Then that will lead to even more chaos. It'll lead to a lot more killing. It'll lead to a lot more harm. If we want to just reduce everything to like a harm principle or preventing harm, you'll get a lot more harm when there's not a kind of deterrence factor.
Accountability.
There's no accountability, or the deterrence factor is low compared to the crime. Okay, I'm going to cheat, steal, I'm going to harm others, kill others, rape others, and at the end of the day, it's not really that big a deal. It's just a pat on the back of the hand, for example.
There's a lot of things as much as I harp on the sort of the negative stuff about the, life in the developed world, I'm pretty grateful for a lot of things. Like, if you look into history, things have been pretty bad at different times. And prior to the messages of the prophets and stuff like that, like I get the sense that things were pretty bad at one point. And it's these new concepts about governance and law and rules and things to abide by have been beneficial to man over time. I honestly just wonder if there's a next chapter, if this is leading to something else. But that aside, I really only have on my side one more kind of. I have one more question I really want to ask you.
Before we get into that last question, what makes you think that the past was so much worse than the present?
Well, I'm not a huge history buff, but for the little bit of looking into it that I have, if I look at the Dark Ages, and there's a lot of depictions of war, a lot of that's still going on. That's a fair question, actually. It kind of reveals a little bit of ignorance in me. But I get this sense that where I am, at least in this part of the world, Canada, and you guys are in the States, I can travel to the States and feel relatively safe. In Canada, I feel relatively safe. I get the notion that there have been times where that wasn't so, that it was more likely that there have been pockets of time where crime and violence and the likelihood that I would have to go off to war and die would have been a higher likelihood. So I kind of, even if I may not agree with all the rules of society, I'm pretty appreciative that we are accountable for things like violence and cruelty, that those things aren't allowed to be rampant, or they're more closely
like, I'm glad a Viking ship's not going to show up in my backyard and pillage my neighborhood.
That's what I mean in a nutshell, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe it wasn't that bad. I wasn't there, so I can't know for sure.
That's a function of you living in Canada, though. But if you lived in like Somalia, or you lived in Venezuela, like constantly being cooed, like that might not be the case, right?
Yeah. I've been to Italy, England, France, Germany, Sweden, Canada, the States, and then parts of like the Dominican and stuff. But that was like on resort. It's a fair thing to say, and maybe I'm not being sensitive to places that are worse off, and it's hard to know what to do. It's hard to know like the proper charity to give to, if you do happen to have compassion for those things. I'm just not sure, I suppose, about that, but I'm grateful in some sense for my safety. That's all I mean by that.
Yeah, I just raised the point because it's part of a vision of civilizational progress, or like a self-identity that, well, we're just so much more progressed than people in the past were more brutal, things were less safe, there were more diseases.
Yeah,
that is part of a kind of civilization myth. I'll claim, and you can dispute it. It's to justify the kind of unending consumerist capitalism, unending technological progress that further restricts human beings and takes us to a path of detachment from what's natural. Like, what is our natural bonds with other human beings, our natural connections with our parents or our spouses or our children, that kind of atomization that I've been referring to throughout the podcast. That to justify that, people have to constantly be told, and they have to constantly believe that, well, this is much better than what came before. You have to think that, otherwise you won't accept it. Otherwise you won't accept, you'll revolt and you'll rebel. You say, look, this is a dystopia and things are much worse than they've ever been. And we have to actually return back to whatever.
I see what you're saying. I wasn't there. Maybe all this medicine that we have is like in response to problems we're already causing for ourselves. It's like, yeah, we've advanced, but we're only fixing things we've brought about. Maybe people were healthier back then. I wasn't there, so I don't know. But I did want to get to my question, and it might be a little bit of a kind of like a, weird curveball question, but every now and then I feel like I've gotten a sense of almost like, is there a non-duality aspect to Islam at all, in the sense of like, is Allah everything? Is Allah in every fiber of reality? Is there a non-dual nature to it, or is that a misinformation I've picked up along the way somehow?
You might have picked that up from a kind of Sufi tradition that was heavily influenced by Platonism, where some of these figures in the past, thinkers like Ibn Arabi, maybe with the concept of wahdat al-wujud, like the oneness of being, like everything that exists is really just Allah, is just God. But that has been considered a heresy. That's in Islam. That's a heresy, that there is a duality. There's Allah, the creator, and the created. And the two are not, God is not indwelling or incarnate within the creation. He's separate from it. So that is the Orthodox Islam. You might have been talking to Muslims who have this other position or some version of it.
Yeah.
But it is a kind of, it is duality between created and creator.
Well, for me, my last question would be, do you have like an overarching theme that you are trying to let out to the world? And then lastly, maybe after you answer that question, you could let our audience know where they can find you, what you got going on, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so again, I really appreciate you guys having me on and asking me really great questions, interesting thoughts that we shared. My overarching theme is I call to Islam. I invite everyone. I invite you. I invite your audience to Islam, to consider it not only a rational level, but also a spiritual level, as providing solutions to the problems that we all are suffering through because of the nature of the world that we live in. Islam, it might seem strange, it might seem stern or harsh on certain things. Some things just might seem bizarre because you're coming from it based off of what you know and what you've learned growing up, going to school, the culture, the worldview that we've adopted because of our environment. And I would just say, don't just write Islam off because something doesn't really vibe with you at first. Give it a chance. Give it a chance. Maybe, talk to a Muslim, ask some probing questions. Try to talk to someone who's going to give you an authentic answer and not just tell you what you want to hear. Someone who's going to just confirm your biases. Be willing to challenge yourself. Be willing to ask hard questions. That's what I like. I like when I'm challenged. I like when people ask me a question that makes me reevaluate. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I haven't thought things from a different perspective, and that's why I like debate. To answer the second part of your question, I have Muslim Skeptic channel on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter, etc. And I engage in these kinds of debates, and I like it when I get challenged. I like to engage in I've debated Christians, I've debated Jews, I've debated Hindus, I've debated other Muslims, atheists. So that's enriching for me,
Yeah.
and I think people enjoy it. And this is part of like the journey of truth. And that's my last name, actually, Haqiqatjou. Hard to pronounce, I know, but it's Persian. But it comes from haqiqat, haq. If you remember, haq being the truth in Arabic. Haqiqat is truth or reality, and Jew meaning seeker in Persian. So the seeker of truth. That's something that I try to live up to. That's my legitimate family name, and from Iran. So I try to live up to that, and that's my overarching message. Let's continue to seek the truth in everything that we do.
Brilliant. They don't just let anybody into Harvard. Very, very smart man.
Beautiful.
And smart people like a challenge, like you said, you know? That's good quality, I think.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you so much, Daniel. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.